afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you are watching the Muddy Waters podcast. And today, once again, we have with us Forrest Robinson. Thanks for joining us again, Forrest.
Thanks for having me, Chuck.
Yeah, well, had a great conversation before. In fact, we've almost always had great conversations when we have chatted, and so felt like it would be good to continue the conversation, especially since I think you had some more interesting things to share with us. But have you been out to the fair yet?
No, I haven't.
No, it's fun. You know, a really happening place
Yeah.
is the Cumberland County Republicans table inside. A really unhappening place is the Cumberland County Democrats table, who practically never even have somebody sitting at it. They just have a couple of things like pieces of white paper with stuff printed out saying, giving like little tidbits of information and, you know, purporting lies about question one. But they don't have anybody there to answer questions.
It's like Biden's rallies.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Like we literally have sometimes 8, 10 people over at the Republican table, you know, including people who are like there. A couple of candidates like Robert Wessels have been there quite a bit. Jim Libby's been there. I haven't been there the whole time, so there are probably others who have been there. But Owen McCarthy was there for a little while today. And I know that Eric Small, who's running for U.S. Congress District 1, is going to be there tomorrow. And so, yeah, just a bunch of people there talking to people, and then just a bunch of other volunteers. And like I said, a lot of engagement. One of my favorite things has been like I had a few Trump hats, not a ton, because I ended up giving out a whole bunch at the you know, at the Charlie Kirk what do you call it? What's the vigil that we did? I actually bought them to sell to try and raise money for the Cumberland County Republican Committee at the fair. But then you know, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, we had this plan. I was like, I need to bring these and kind of give them out in honor of Charlie, and probably gave out 40 or 50. And there probably were like 20 more people who wanted some, but I had left some in my car because I couldn't fit them all in my backpack. So we sold those in very short order. On Wednesday, I brought them over, and in a matter of a couple of hours, we sold them mostly to people who are paying attention. This shouldn't surprise anyone, to young men, like teenagers or young adults.
Good to hear.
Primarily men, not just men. There have been a couple girls, but yeah. So anyway, just been a lot of fun. We have a nice picture of Charlie Kirk up that says we are Charlie Kirk, which is pretty fun as well. Yeah. So if you haven't been to the Cumberland Fair, I was corrected. It's not the Cumberland County Fair, for the record. For those of you paying attention, it's the Cumberland Fair. In the town of Cumberland, within Cumberland County, but it's the Cumberland Fair. So if you haven't, go check it out. There's lots of good food to eat. We'll have people staffing the table all through the rest. I think tomorrow's the last day. So check us out. So wanted to continue the conversation as I said before, and you know, some interesting stuff you had shared with me about things you know, leading up to the birth of your daughter. So I figure, you know, I'll let you kind of tell your story, your trajectory, how you came to be there, and what your views were before all this. And
yeah, I'd love to. So I guess I'll start at the beginning. So after high school, I took a gap year. Wasn't really sure where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be. You know, and I took a lot of that time to read. And there was one book I read in particular, which I had actually talked about with you and Ryan when we had coffee. It's this book called Why Liberalism Failed by Patrick Deneen. And he goes into a lot of detail. I won't get too down in the weeds about the politics behind it, but you know, one of the most salient points he made was that, you know, what we've seen in America is, you know, our social capital, which is just another word for like community health, is in the decline. Like there's a great book called Bowling Alone that talks a lot about this, that goes into the data, but people aren't really part of communities anymore. People are attending churches less. You know, people don't feel that sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves anymore. We kind of live in our own little world, and that really resonated with me because I grew up and I had never gone to church or anything, but I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. And I kind of had a spiritual awakening after college and after my grandmother had passed away. So I looked around for schools in the New England area that were Christian, and I stumbled upon Gordon College, which is in Wenham, Massachusetts. And I applied there, and I remember going there and being in that environment, and it kind of felt like a fish out of water experience because it wasn't, you know, customary in my life to pray before meals and do stuff like that. But I really appreciated it and I really loved it. And I felt like these people really cared, about their religion. So I ended up going to Gordon in 2020 amidst the pandemic and everything. Um, and I talked a little bit about my experiences there, and you know, even though I had some bad experiences, I'm still glad that I went. But I ended up leaving in part because of the political, you know, turmoil and whatnot, but for other reasons too. And then I ended up actually going back a couple years later in 2023, I think, or 2022. No. And before I had gone back, I was connecting with some people that were still attending Gordon, that I hadn't talked to in a while, just because I didn't want to go back there and kind of just be alone and doing my own thing. I wanted to, connect with people, have friends and whatnot. And I messaged, this one girl, who I always kind of had a crush on, and we went on walks and stuff together and got to know each other, and really hit it off. And then, once I got to Gordon, we kind of became boyfriend and girlfriend. And yeah, we dated for a couple years. Um, and then in October of 2023, um, she found out she was pregnant. Um, and this kind of came as a shock, you know what I mean? But I said from the beginning of our relationship, like, it's one of my biggest goals in life and just aspirations to be a dad. I've always wanted to be a father. um, so even though I was like taken aback, shocked, it's like, holy cow, big news. um, I was elated, I was so happy. And she was too. I mean, it's scary. I mean, everyone, if they're not expecting big news like that, it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do from here? And I was working at Hannaford. I lived with my mom at this point. Like, I was, all these thoughts were racing through my head. Like, we got to get an apartment. We have to get married, and all this stuff was happening. But amidst all that kind of you know race that was going on in my mind, like, I was so happy. But anyways, so she was pregnant. Um, and we made a bunch of plans. I ended up getting a new job at FedEx, which was fantastic, and I was really blessed to be given that opportunity. And then this is kind of where the dark part of the story begins. So in February, so this is some time had passed since we found out that my ex was pregnant. Uh, in February, she got an ultrasound, and the doctor, looking at the ultrasound, saw that a part of our daughter's brain was missing. And that part of the brain, it's called the cavum septum pellucidum, CSP for short. Um, and a lot of doctors don't know exactly what it does, but typically when it's absent, that tends to be comorbid with other issues like absence of the corpus callosum or an underdeveloped corpus callosum. And it can also mean uh, certain your kid can develop certain conditions like septo-optic dysplasia, which usually means issues with the optic nerves and you know troubles with hormonal development and whatnot. Impairment of vision. But we didn't really know about this condition and whatnot after learning about our daughter's absent CSP. Sometimes during an ultrasound, it's not even detectable, but it ends up developing later. So basically, after finding out that news, we were horrified because, you're thinking in the back of your head, like, what happens if she ends up being born with all these, issues and whatnot? It's like the last thing you want to hear as a parent. So we were both horrified. And for a while after that, we were kind of in a state of limbo of just not knowing what was going to happen. And then we ended up going to Boston's Children's Hospital to get an MRI to really know for sure if this part of her brain was missing. And, we had to wait a little bit for the results after that. And then we attended this Zoom meeting with the neurologist who's, responsible, whose job it is to like analyze, the imagery in the brain and whatnot and detect issues and see if that part of the brain was missing. And so we attended the Zoom meeting. We were really anxious, really nervous, like hoping that, our daughter's brain was going to be perfectly okay. And he was talking with us and he was blunt. He said, look, the cavum septum pellucidum, it's missing from your daughter's brain. And he had also brought up some other findings, which escape me now, but nevertheless, they weren't looking too promising. And he basically said, like if, and I hate to think about this because he's talking to us, and obviously, he understands this is the last thing any parent wants to hear. So, obviously he's sympathetic, but at the same time, he's telling us, if you wish to terminate and that word terminate, it's such a euphemism because really what you're doing when you get an abortion is you're murdering your child. But obviously they wouldn't say that because they cloak, their language and compassion. Like it's the merciful thing to do is to kill your kid. But anyways, he basically presented that option. And when you hear something like that, it's when a doctor either recommends or presents abortion as an option, you think like how like this is my daughter, you know what I mean? Like it's just unconscionable. But anyways, after that, um we that was a really difficult time. This was in February. Our daughter was born um in June. So from February to June, my ex and I were just wondering how she would be when she was born. Like, is she going to be healthy? Is she going to have issues with eyesight? Is she going to be blind? Because the neurologist had even said it's a possibility she could have vision impairment all the way up to blindness. Like that condition that I had mentioned, cephaloptic dysplasia, it exists on a spectrum. So she could be okay, she could end up developing fine, or she could be blind. It was just there were so many unknowns. And my ex, this hit her really hard, and it hit me really hard. It hit all of us hard because I mean that's your baby, that's your child, but she was able to persevere through the pregnancy. We didn't end up getting an abortion, thank God. And our daughter was born, and after shortly after she was born, they she got another MRI where it was found that that part of the brain was still absent. And after our daughter was born, we were worried about all these things that the neurologist had mentioned, like seizures. So, anytime she would act somewhat strangely, or her vision would be fixated on something, we're like, oh my gosh, she's having a seizure. So that was very difficult for my ex and I. But here's the good part of the story. So my daughter, against all odds, ended up developing perfectly normally. She's met every milestone with flying colors. Like, I mean, right now she turned 1 back in June, and she's babbling, she's walking, she's already saying small words at this point like dada and flower, like not the full word, but she when you show her a number or something, she'll say like the basic parts of it. And it's remarkable. It is a miracle. I think so. Um, and so does my ex and my family and whatnot. But to go back to kind of the lesson of the story, and I'd like to mention, I brought up in the previous podcast that I used to be, a liberal, a leftist, a progressive, and I was pro-choice. I just saw it as, something that should be left up to a woman and her doctor, like the Democrat politicians always say. Um, but I wasn't really cognizant of the horror of it. Like you hear about abortion, you hear people describe it as like, oh, it's just a bundle of cells. You don't really see, or a lot of people do, but I think a lot of liberals don't see it for what it is. They kind of think of it in abstract terms, like it's not a human being, it's a bundle of cells. And kind of what started to make me change my mind is I saw pictures of abortions. And they don't share that stuff around because it's graphic, but I saw
Yeah.
some pictures that Live Action
Mm.
had posted of abortions, with like scissors and stuff and limbs all bloody, and even like third trimester abortions, which are legal in some places. I don't know how, but it's up to birth in some states.
Including Maine.
Yeah, including Maine. And I
Yeah.
remember at gubernatorial debate, the host had brought up how we have one of the most universally pro-choice, abortion laws in the state. Which, I mean, to think that my daughter, like when I saw her when she came out of the womb, that baby could have been killed. I don't understand it. I really don't. But yeah, so I started to change my mind on abortion, and it's kind of not something that happens overnight. You think, okay, first trimester, that's okay. And then the more I start to think about it, I'm like, no, this is wrong in all cases. Um, and really, like, apart from the fact that you're literally killing a human being, there's something else about abortion which I think is applicable to everybody. People that are living right now that, you know, have been fortunate enough to be granted with life and to be happy and to be healthy. I feel like, within the family, peace and order, it's attained by service to the weak. And what else is weaker, more vulnerable than a child? They're completely dependent upon you. Like when I'm with my daughter, like I have to hold her hand when we're walking out, because I don't want her to, pick something up and eat it, or I don't want her to trip and fall. You know, when you're a baby, you need your parents, you need your family, So I feel like the family, first and foremost, is evidence that domination of the weak is unnecessary. Like as parents, we have power over this beautiful being, but instead of exercising that power in a bad way, in a tyrannical way, we love them, we raise them up, we show them the world, to give them all the love that they deserve as a human being. You know what I mean? But what
Yeah.
abortion does is it replaces that paradigm of love with a paradigm of power. It makes every living person someone whose right to life is a right that's granted and conditioned by whoever has power over you. You know what I mean? Like to
Mm.
treat a child as someone it would have been permissible to kill means the family it exists at the whim of power. You know what I mean? At the mother's discretion. And a woman's choice to love her child like doesn't change that, because the way it's framed and in politics is that love is an option. It's a private thing, personal thing. So it's not politically relevant, even if it's real in discussions of abortion. And but imagine this, like to say I love you to your kid, and then in the same breath to say, I could have ended your life, if I decided I wasn't ready to have you. You know what I mean? It like it reframes love as something which is conditional, which is subordinate to power. It makes
Hmm.
love like state allowed love. And I know, pro-choice people, the way they talk about abortion is like, the government shouldn't, be in charge of my body. They shouldn't, step in and say, this is my body, I mean, that's the classic line. This is my body, my choice. But it's not your choice
That must
because
be, is that like the only issue where the Democrats claim to want to give choice to people? I'm being a little facetious here for a moment,
yeah,
but like most of what they're trying to do is have power and control over people, right? They want to overregulate businesses. They want to tell people what kind of power you're allowed to use. They want
yeah,
to tell you what types of when it comes to all these different industries, like and everything, like it's all about over regulation and telling you what you can do when you can do it, except in a couple of categories, the special categories. But anyway, I'm just kind of like that's just
yeah,
kind of hit me as like here they're acting like libertarians, whereas everywhere else they're like, nope, you have to put these vaccines in your bodies, and you have to do these other things. Again, the government anyway
yeah,
tells you what you can do, when you can do it, how you can do it. But here, anyway,
right.
it's the appearance of giving people choice, in my opinion. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah. And I don't even see it as a rights issue. It's because, I mean, what right, if you even want to call it that, is more fundamental than the right to exist? I mean, as a fetus, you're voiceless. There's no group of people on the planet, or anybody that has ever existed, who is more voiceless than a fetus. They have no choice over what happens to them.
they don't have representatives in the House.
I
I'm
mean, yeah,
kidding.
they do. Yeah,
I
they
know, no,
have
I meant like
and whatnot, of course, but like they themselves
right.
can't
I'm
speak.
I'm teasing. I'm saying there aren't other like fetuses representing in the House, right? Like, but yeah,
Right.
yeah, they're voiceless. Yeah, absolutely. They're completely dependent, as you were saying earlier. Sorry, I keep interrupting, but
No,
I
no, no,
think
you're
I
good.
think I'm funny.
Yeah, it's a good point though. And there are people that have survived abortions too, who
Yeah,
speak for the unborn. Um,
yeah.
but the thing that really horrifies me is my daughter could have been aborted. Like, there are so many young women who, and I don't, I don't want to say people who get abortions are evil. It's an evil choice, in my opinion, but it doesn't make them evil, inherently. And many people, I mean, I know people in my personal life that have gotten abortions, and I mean, it scares me, but I love them regardless. But
Yeah.
and it's one of those things. Sorry, I lost my
No, it's all
train.
right. I'll just kind of jump in real quick. And like,
Yeah, yeah,
I come from a Christian perspective, and so the Christian perspective, I think, would say that everyone I think that there's ways to explain this, but everyone has a sufficient amount of evil within them. So there is like an aspect of the nature and character. This is why we need a savior, is because we're broken to the point where we can't fix ourselves. We don't need the right self help book. We need a cure. We need somebody that, like, as it talks about in the Old Testament, there's the dry bones of Ezekiel. We're basically dead, and we need to be brought to life. So there's an element there that, like, I think everybody falls into that category to some degree, or yeah, and it's just more evident, I think, in some people than it is in others. But ultimately, we're all similar to a child who's in the womb of the mother. We're all dependent on, in my opinion, on God in some form or fashion, and we
mhm,
need to rely on Him in order to be able to be rescued from the brokenness and fallenness within us. And that's kind of so like that. So kind of your point that, like, but at the same time, to your point, like we don't condemn people who make poor decisions, because we believe that everybody makes poor decisions and everybody's in need of like redemption and healing. And yeah, so that's kind of just that's the Christian perspective, if that makes sense. It's not
Yeah,
hate for people who do it. We do hate the act. We do not hate the people for doing it, especially because like in your situation, like it's and you didn't, but like it seemed like there's at least a low level of pressure from the doctor that, oh, you should probably like do this if you want to. Like, you didn't ask for it, he presented it without,
right.
or he or she, I don't know if the doctor was I don't want to presume the gender of the doctor since I don't even know who they are, you know.
Mm,
But like, they, whoever it was, you know, suggested like, hey, if you want to do this, there, this is the option there. And like, you guys weren't even asking anything about that. So it's like it's being
right.
presented as an option, which is, yeah, it's really interesting. It just shows how prevalent this is. And as you said, like, it was for a child who ended up being born just fine.
Yeah. I actually, you reminded me of what I was going to say. So there was a lot of pressure placed on it, especially my ex. You know, she had some friends who, you know, suggested abortion. You know, there were other people, and you hear that, and like I'll never understand as a woman what that's like to, you know, be. So it's different. I feel when you're actually carrying the child because it's part of you. You know, like Willow, my daughter, she's part of me. You know, I see her as an extension of me. I live vicariously through her, and I love her more than words can describe. But to be told that when while you're pregnant, either from a doctor who's presenting it as an option or a friend who, you know, they may have good intentions and whatnot, but they're suggesting it as a possible option. Like the damage that does to you psychologically, I mean, I can't even imagine. Um, and what I was gonna say earlier is like now that my daughter's healthy, now that she's grown up, I just think of all the kids who could have existed. I mean, what is the number? Like, I think 70 million children have been aborted since like the 1970s, since Roe v. Wade became law. Um, and that's, I mean, what's the number? 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. Like, that's
Yeah,
multiple Holocaust. And I just,
like nine times,
and
eight,
I
yeah,
mean, it's
eight,
a number. It
yeah,
doesn't,
whatever it is, 8 times.
yeah, yeah. And it's a
No,
number. It
12
doesn't,
times. What am I saying? 12. Wow, my math is way off today. 12,
ridiculous.
almost 12 times. Jeez.
Yeah, that's 12. And it's one of those things like, you know, you see the number on a piece of paper. Okay, 70 million. The brain can't comprehend that number. Like we can picture 100 people in a room. You know what I mean? Our brains can grasp that, but millions upon millions of people. We've never in our whole lives, every person, think of every person you've ever met in your entire life. That doesn't even come close to that number.
Yeah.
And I think of that,
What's the population of America right now? Right, about
yeah,
350 million. So that's like one fifth.
yeah, 1/5, dude. I mean,
Let's just, yeah,
and it's really horrifying because, and you know, you hear a lot of pro-choice people talk about how, you know, well, what about in instances of rape, that's always the argument that they use. But really, and I've looked at, I mean, because when I was trying to decide whether I was pro-choice or pro-life, I heard that argument so much and I made the same argument myself. Such a small fraction of abortions are done because of rape. They are done electively, either because, you know, the mother isn't ready, has just simply decided she, and every, you know, circumstance is different, every case is different, but generally speaking, it's because either they're not ready, they feel like they don't have enough money, um, or it's, you know, a myriad of different reasons, but none of them justify, like, I mean, just the fact that and I read today on, on X that babies, I mean, you can imagine like in the third trimester, they experience pain when they're aborted. Like, I mean, you can't even put yourself in a fetus's shoes because I mean, they're like in the womb. Like it's not something we can experientially relate. We don't remember what it's like to be a baby, you know? So
Yeah.
I think of that and I'm like, how how can we be for I think it's the greatest, or no, I don't, I shouldn't say the greatest, but the worst violation of dignity, of morality that our species has ever done, because it's babies, it's children. And like I don't want to get too, emotional over this, but like I see my daughter and I just think she could have not existed.
Hmm.
Like she could have been one of those 70 million other children.
Yeah.
And I don't want to beat a dead horse, because I think I've kind of conveyed, the point I'm trying to make. It's just I
Yeah.
really want
Well,
to drive that home, that it's, you know, there's a lot of people that really care about the pro-life movement, and I cared about it before I had my daughter, but it's one thing to like to see it, like to have your kid be there and think that they could have easily not, I don't know. But
yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. Um
Yeah, I think it's one thing to think about things in a vacuum, right? And it's another thing, obviously, it's kind of what you're describing, to like go through the process to a degree. And obviously, you guys didn't have an abortion, but just going through the process of like having an unplanned pregnancy and having to be able to being forced to make a decision, which I think, like, for you, it doesn't sound like was really much of a decision, and I think similarly probably for your ex, although it seems like she did have a lot of people pressuring her, which this is the fascinating thing about all this, is like, supposedly on the Democrat side, this is about women's rights. This is about empowering women to do what women want to do. But
mm,
I think if you took a poll, most women who have abortions are pressured into having them.
yep.
Either this is going to ruin your career, right, or from their parents, or from their like significant others, whoever the father is, right? Like, and so I would wager that the vast majority of women who get abortions, if they just had appropriate support, if they had people willing to come alongside them and support them and say, yeah, have the baby, we will help you in whatever way you need, which is partly where community and churches come in,
Mm,
because, like, I can tell you that, like, there are a ton of people in all the churches that I go to that would love to be able to support and help somebody who is in a position of having to being forced, having to have a baby unplanned. There's some great organizations throughout the state. Down here in Portland, there's ABBA Women's Resource Center that can help women walk through and make sure that they at least evaluate all of their options, and not just go straight for abortion. And they provide parenting and parenting support afterwards. And they also, if I'm not mistaken, most crisis pregnancy centers do. They provide emotional support and counseling for women who have had abortions and are dealing with the after effect. This is the other piece that the Democrats just gloss over, and all of the pro abortionists, they just ignore as though it doesn't exist, is that, like, the women who have abortions, like, it affects them. It's not like it's over. It's not like a simple procedure where I just went and had surgery and I had, my wrist repaired, and yeah, it's got to heal, but outside of that, I'm fine. Like, this is
mm,
something that weighs down on them, because we all know at our core that this is a human life,
right.
right? That's the reality. That is a fact. We know it.
Mm,
And so I think so I think it's yeah. Anyway, like, there's a lot of stuff there, and that's why women, 36 years later, they're going to still be thinking about that. And anyway, so it's much more complex than they want to make you believe. Plus, I always like to bring out that, what is the motivation behind it? Why are people pushing it so aggressively?
mm,
So, like, when there's so much money coming from all these places to push this. Now,
mm,
number one, it's like one of the only issues that the Democrats like are winning on, in a sense, in terms of national viewpoints. Um,
mm,
but why? How are they like? Why is there so much money that's being put behind trying to push these types of things?
Mm,
and I think it has a lot to do with a couple of things. One is the globalists, the global elites, the global parasites is another way to put it,
mm,
desire to reduce the population down to 500 million. Well, what's like that's what they want worldwide. This is what like the World Economic Forum and a lot of these like really high powered globalists say. But the other that's so the other factor is that they want to live forever.
mm,
And like, especially, this is why there's a push for late term abortion because they use stem cells, which have incredible regenerative powers because they're being put into babies, and they're pieces of babies that are supposed to create and grow that life. So there's tons of growth, like power, we'll say, in a sense, in that. And so they take these in order to use them in stem cell therapies in order to help make people like recover from injury faster and look younger. And so there's an element, and there's such a huge money machine behind that's part of what's pushing it. I remember the Democrats used to say things like "follow the money," but when it comes to transgenderism and abortion, they're like, "No, don't follow the money," uh, because
yeah.
it's a scary trail for them.
Another thing I think about too, and that's a really good question. Like, why do they care so much about? I mean, if they say it's a private decision, it should be left up to the women. Why are they so passionate about making abortion legal and easily available? And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, you know, the family as it exists as an institution, is a threat to the state because the family, when you have a family, you have skin in the game. There's nothing that matters more to you than making your family happy and healthy, and all your resources go toward that, toward getting a house, toward, getting your kid into college. And, the state sees that as a threat because the state wants you to be subordinate to them. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier is, abortion, it doesn't just affect the children themselves who are aborted. It affects all of us because it reframes love as something which is conditional, which is optional. Like,
Hmm.
there's nothing more love, there's no act of love greater than giving life to another human being. And by making abortion legal, we make that an option. And it shouldn't be an option, it should just be something we just do. Like, when you find out you're pregnant, you have to see to it that that child lives. I mean, it's as simple as, like, when you go outside and you see someone, you're not going to kill them if they inconvenience you. Like, but that same logic applies to, pregnancy. But for some reason, people see it differently than that. But the thing that I really want to drive home is that it changes the paradigm of love, which is unique to the family specifically, unique to and the church, and which is like an extended family. But the family itself is founded on love. It is built by love for love. The state is built by power for power. And abortion is so important to the people in power because it makes something which is built on unconditional love. You know, love bears all things. It transcends all things. It moves mountains. It's a well that never dries up. You know what I mean? But power is fleeting. Power, you can lose power. And the state is like envious of the fact that there's this institution, there are these people that have these families which they are wholly dedicated to, that they will die for. And the state wants that. It wants you to die for them. It wants you, it's like a parasite. What that example you just gave, how people are using these fetuses to make themselves live longer, that's kind of like the state. It's like parasitism. They're trying to suck this love, turn it into something else, something distorted, whilst also saying, like, in some cases, abortion is a moral thing to do. Like, it's an act of mercy for children that have down syndrome or have issues or will be born and die shortly after, like it's a good thing that you end this being's life because it's going to suffer, but life is suffering. And this is kind of a point I wanted to convey. Like we were talking about things to discuss tonight. I think abortion really illustrates the nature of leftist violence, because you know part of the reason why I became a conservative in the first place, obviously, hate watching Ben Shapiro and whatnot, that helped me change my mind. But one of the things I realized, in reading the script that Stanley Kubrick had written, he was going to make a biopic about Napoleon. And there was this one line that he had Napoleon say where, during the French Revolution, um, you know, as a society, or in France specifically, we transferred original sin from man to society. And what that means is that now man is no longer seen as a being which is inherently condemned to suffer, to live in sin, to be born in sin, to be born into a fallen world. Rather, he's born good, and everywhere else he is in chains. That's a line specifically from Rousseau, who was, one of the progenitors of the French Revolution and that revolutionary leftist spirit. And that idea that, you know, that we aren't inherently sinful, but it's society that is causing man to be evil, or it's because of the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution, or because of the bourgeoisie or the patriarchy. You're no longer recognizing and being conscious of evil as it exists, as it is fundamental to being as such. You're seeing it as a byproduct of somebody else, as an institution, or as the patriarchy, like I just said. And that idea paved the way, I think, for communism, for the Russian Revolution in 1917, because all of these people were mobilized to commit these horrific acts of atrocity, just like in the French Revolution, where people were guillotined, like Antoinette, killed because in the French Revolution, the left, and I shouldn't say the left because the left then was very different from now, but they saw the French monarchy, this hierarchy, as being inherently corrupt, and they saw that institution as the cause of all their problems. And I think a lot of women, they become pro-choice because they see an invasion happening from this vague, you know, oppressor known as the patriarchy. It doesn't have a face, but it manifests itself in certain behaviors that men have, that they're unconscious of, that they can't even like rid themselves of. It's like the same idea with, unconscious bias, like in whiteness. Like you don't know that you're being racist, but you actually are. You just don't know it. Like
It's not
it's
you're not inherently sinful, but you are inherently sinful if you're a white person.
right, right.
It's your
Whiteness
sin
is
is being white.
right. Yeah, exactly. 100%. And the same thing applies to,
Hmm.
communist theory. Like, if you're born into a wealthy family, you don't recognize all of these classist behavior. And there's some truth to those things. But nevertheless, like I want to convey the fact that, what the left does is they transfer original sin from man to something else. And
Hmm.
they believe that as long as we, rid society of this corrupt group, whatever they may be, whether it's, the billionaires, or whether it's, the white men in Congress who are, trying to control women's bodies, as long as we get those people out of the way, then we'll live in heaven, and that's why people say like communism and wokeism are like pseudo religions, because they present this salvation narrative, like, okay, as long as we, as long as us, the downtrodden, the victims, as long as we can overthrow these people, then everything will be okay. And children and innocent people, like what happened in Maoist China, innocent people end up being sacrificed at the altar of these pseudo religions that develop, which, obviously they're political in nature, but really it's a theological thing. It's a battle between good and evil. And I think that's what we're seeing now with Charlie Kirk. This is a battle between people that love their family, that just want to live their lives in peace, and people who are bitter, who have been, you know, just overtaken by resentment and bitterness and latch on to these pseudo religions like it's all that matters to them. And there are things that matter more. And I think the reason why, there's these people springing up out of nowhere committing these school shootings and these, horrific acts of violence like what happened to Charlie is because they don't have skin in the game. They have, I mean, some of them may have, things going for them, like with school and whatnot, but people have less and less now. Like
Hmm.
it's harder to start a family. It's harder to build something. I mean, like you mentioned the World Economic Forum, their famous slogan is you will own nothing and be happy. But if you own nothing, if you have nothing, then what's stopping you from, like, freedom is just another word for having nothing left to lose. If you have nothing left to lose, what's stopping you from killing someone because you're angry? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, I think it's definitely a complicated mess, and there's
yeah.
like with a lot of these shooters, there's like a mental health issue, but there's
Mm,
also like, yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think our society is dumbing down, and kind of like part, this is kind of connected to the abortion issue, but like also a number of other issues is
mm,
like, what are we living for? Right? I think that's the problem, right? What are you living for? And if you're not living for something that's bigger than yourself,
right.
then you're not living. Are you living a life that's worth living? Right? And I think that there's a lot of like, we actually know from data and statistics, right, that liberals are more mentally unwell.
Mm,
This is, we actually know this based on like again the data. They're actually more mentally unstable. They're less healthy in terms of their mental health than conservatives.
mm,
And I think it's because they're living in ways that are not healthy for humans. I mean, I think God created things in a very good order. Husband, wife, children. Like, this is actually good for, like, one of the most therapeutic things for me is to go spend time with, either whether it's my brothers or some other friends that I have that have children, and children are
mm.
just such a delight. They're
Yeah.
so much fun to be around. They get like, kid walks in and is just happy. Like, obviously, yeah, sometimes they cry and that's a bit annoying, but like, whatever. I used to work in the bank and people would come in and cry all the time. And they're adults, and it's a lot worse when it's an adult than when it's a child.
Mm,
um because neither one of them can be reasoned with, but one of them should be able to be. um but but anyway, children are just so incredibly like, it just it's such a better way to live. Like, this
yeah.
idea of like, oh, it's better for me to like, make money and go on vacations by like with my spouse. And then most of these people, these, like, we call them dinks. This is a term from financial advisory school, whatever, where double income, no kids. And they're not saying like that they're mean, but it actually is kind of true at the same time. Like, these people that, because they're just living for themselves, they're living so that they can make money, so that they can go on vacations, and so that they can retire early, maybe. I don't know, like, but what's the point
Mm,
of that? Like, that's just,
right.
that's a very futile, unhappy, realistically unhappy life. Yes, having children, getting married and having children, like, with the intention of having children, being faithful to one person for your entire life, that is more difficult. You're absolutely right. However,
Mm,
it's also much more fulfilling. And I actually am more interested in living a more fulfilled life than living an easier life, right? Like, that actually is a silly thing, but that's one of the things that they're pushing. They're pushing children as being inconvenient, um,
yeah.
and too difficult, too challenging. It's too hard. And it's like, I mean, but if you talk to people, like, yes, there are some bad parents out there. There are some people that don't take it seriously. There are some people who treat their kids incredibly poorly. But like, we shouldn't be like focusing only on that. First of all, we should be focusing on like this is how we want to push people in a direction that is good for society overall. And the reality is, you want a motivated worker, hire somebody who is a dad and has a family to provide for, right?
Right.
He's going to work a lot harder than somebody who's just like, you know, living to live,
Right.
because why do, okay, yeah, I could work really hard and I could make more money. And yeah, maybe I could buy a house, maybe in today's market, right? Maybe I could, get a better apartment, whatever. But like, if there's not something more, like he's a lot less likely to work as hard. And so from an employment standpoint, somebody who has a family is actually a much better employee in so many ways. And so like, there are so many different factors at so many different levels where family is something that is good for society, and so we need more of it, not only because we need to replace ourselves, like in order to like be able to continue to take care of everybody here. Like one of the things Elon Musk sometimes talks about, and I think Charlie Kirk and Steve Robinson talked about when Charlie was here, was like the fact that we're way below replacement rate here in the state of Maine. We're not having enough kids to keep up with the people the services that are needed to take care of everybody that's here now and to replace the people so that we can continue to maintain our society. And that's all, as a result of this. So this anti, it seems to me to be like very anti-God, anti-human, and that's where I think the Democrat Party. You talk about religion, the Democrat Party is a death cult.
Yeah.
It's what it feels like on so many different levels. And yeah, I mean, anyway, it's very interesting. But I do want to get to get to the issue that we wanted to kind of chat about today a little bit, partly because it was a really interesting thing. So for those of you, I mean, people who have been watching probably already know this, but I actually went to Phoenix, Arizona, this last weekend to be at I don't know, whatever you want to call it, Charlie Kirk's memorial service or funeral or whatever it was officially called. But I was actually there in person, got there at 4 a.m. That was fun. Waited in line, talked to some great people who were there for this great thing. It was just an incredible experience to be there. But yeah, so obviously Erica Kirk spoke, and one of the things that she did was she publicly proclaimed that she was forgiving the young man who had murdered her husband. And there were a lot of different thoughts and views and ideas about that. And so I know you have some, and yours maybe do differ a little bit from mine, but I thought it would be fun rather than like having a signal chat or whatever, just to kind of talk about that here, because I think, I think it's an interesting, I mean, I think there are a lot of interesting things about the life and then the death of Charlie Kirk that seem like they're really good things. It's bad, obviously, we're going to lose Charlie Kirk, but like obviously the groundswell of people a number of people registering as Republican in response to how the Democrats behaved, and also just the fact that he was killed for speaking freely. It's causing people to be like, oh my gosh, this is there's a problem, and the problem is more on the left than on the right. And so you've got a lot of people making the decision to shift over there. And then obviously with Erica Kirk making that public proclamation, just a further emphasis, I think, on the difference between Democrat and Republican in today's world. They want to say that we're more violent. Arguably, you could argue that George Floyd was killed by the police, or you could argue that he died of an overdose. Regardless, he was not like, whether it's not, if he was killed by the police, it's not a good thing, right? Obviously, we can all agree on that. But he was also not a good person, and it was part of like his resisting arrest that put him in the position that he was in, and a number of other things. And the left, not only did they glorify him as the saint of the left, but they also burned down cities. Like we called it the summer. Some people called it the summer of love. I don't know if I heard you say that the last time you were on, right? Versus on the right, where you have peaceful vigils all across the country for a number of days leading up to the point in which the woman of the man who was killed, the wife, Erica Kirk, forgave the person who took his life. So
Mm.
anyway, there's that. But you have questions about some elements of that. So I want to give you the opportunity to kind of
Yeah.
take your take on what happened there, because I think I'll let you do that. But before I do, like, obviously, like, how can somebody, I think this is the question, like, how can somebody authentically and truly and really forgive somebody for doing such a heinous act, especially as soon after the murder as it was?
Right. Yeah, I guess before I get to that question, which is, kind of the big one, um, just some observations I had, and you can let me know what your thoughts were on this because you were actually physically there um, at the stadium, at the State Farm Stadium. But one thing, this is just what I felt instinctually, like watching the event, as it was live streamed, as it seemed a lot, it was framed as this memoriam, which is for Charlie Kirk. And obviously, Charlie, he was a political figure throughout his life. A lot of people said this is how he would have wanted it, which, that's amazing. Like, I'd imagine he's looking down from heaven, seeing all these people whose lives he touched, and like he's probably smiling up there, like, holy cow. I mean, it was all worth it, despite all the pain and struggles and whatnot. And I think that's awesome. And I think everybody that showed up, with their rosaries and their MAGA hats, like I saw Christina Parker, talking about how she had like never cried more in her life. Like that is incredible. The only thing I kind of take issue with is, it was framed as a memoriam, but it felt more kind of like a spectacle, like a political rally. And I think, just the way the event looked, like, when I think of a memoriam, I mean, this is kind of a bad example, but like at the Oscars, which is, that's where people go to celebrate how, abortion enabled them to, become an actress and whatnot. So it's like a liberal thing, But like during the memoriam there, like, where they show actors who had passed away, like they show pictures of them in black and white, and it's a very somber thing because death is a very, I mean, it's evidence that we live in a fallen world, that we are sinful beings and that life is finite, life is fleeting. And that's a very scary and, you know, very humbling thought. I think about my grandmother's funeral, and, shortly before she had passed, I think death should be treated in a very somber way. And when I look at like the people that it spoke there and what they said, it was a lot of people in Trump's cabinet. And though they did talk about Charlie, which I loved and I thought was amazing, and they talked about the impact he had, they also took it as an opportunity to talk about politics. And I understand, there, but I think there's a time and a place for that, like at CPAC or at the Republican National Convention. But when I see like people walking out to like pyrotechnics and stuff, and the fact that Erica Kirk wasn't even the keynote speaker, Trump was the last one to speak.
I have
I
thoughts
felt
about
like,
that, but continue.
yeah, yeah. Um, but I just, you know, I and I felt like the way the event was presented, even though I loved a lot of the speeches, I loved a lot of what Tucker Carlson had to say. I feel
Yeah.
like for a memoriam, which is about Charlie Kirk, it's not about politics. It's about Charlie Kirk, the fact that he was a father, that, he even said himself when asked, during an interview, how do you want to be remembered? And he said, I wanted to be remembered for my faith, not for being a Republican, not for being a supporter of Trump or the GOP, for his faith. And I think, you know, there's no one that knows that better than his friends and his families and his colleagues. But from what I remember, like his parents didn't go up there. None of his friends went up there. It was Tucker Carlson, it was Robert Kennedy, Marco Rubio, you know, Trump. And I know Trump was really close to Charlie Kirk and even saw him as a son. So and he's the president. It's, a testament to Charlie's, you know, brilliance and love and passion that the president of the United States showed up. Um, but yeah, I felt like the way the event was presented, it was more like a spectacle, like a rally. Um, and yeah, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that. You know.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you should mention that because I feel like it was like there were definitely some tensions within me. There's like a part of me, so I'm a Christian and I'm in politics, and I feel like I'm nowhere near Charlie Kirk. Obviously, I never will be. I don't have whatever it is that he had,
Mm.
like the god-given talent, and then also like the drive, and I wish I had the drive and the motivation and the
I know.
height. I would
Same
like to
here.
have the height. I'm kind of a short, fat guy.
Me
So
too.
like if I could have the height, I wouldn't even need to lose weight. It would just be spread out, and people wouldn't even know. You know,
Yeah.
but no, in all reality though, like like he's incredible. Ultimately, what I'm doing is following a similar call in my life, where I feel like God has called me to get involved in politics, to kind of save our state, save our nation, right?
Mm.
Which is, so I feel like I'm in the same vein as him. Primarily here, I'm not here to preach the gospel. Like I'm here to talk politics, and that's how Charlie lived his life. I mean, his primary motivation was his faith. That's what he wanted to be remembered. Again, courage. I think he said, "Courage for my faith," is what he said in the interview. I think within the last, like, with a couple weeks before this all happened, you know, and so like you can't, but here's the thing, is like this is the tricky part about Charlie Kirk, right? You
Mm.
can't have a memorial for Charlie Kirk without it being incredibly political as well as
Mm.
being incredibly Christian, right?
Right.
Because he was both. Like the primary motivator for why he did everything that he did was his faith. So if you're going to be honest, you have to talk about that a lot.
Right.
But the venue that he worked in was the political, and so you had to deal with a lot of you're dealing with the accomplishments and the things that he's done, and it all ends up being in the political realm, and so, like, sure, I mean, some of the speakers to me didn't make a lot of sense necessarily. Like, I mean, Rubio is fine. I don't really know much about like there being a connection between Rubio, or even Tulsi Gabbard, for instance, and Charlie Kirk. But RFK, and this didn't get like drawn out. Trump, I think, meant to go there, but Trump did Trump and got sidetracked talking about how amazing he is. And he's doing a lot of good things, like I get it. He loves to talk about it. He's a little braggadocious. And I'm fine with that as long as he keeps doing good things. But like I think
Yeah.
he started talking about RFK, and he didn't get to the point where I think he meant to go when he got there, and he got distracted. And it's like he's got a squirrel somewhere in his brain. He's like, oh, there's another thing I want to talk about over here. We're really great. Which was I think I suspect that what he intended to do when he started talking about RFK was talk about how Charlie Kirk is the reason that RFK is in the administration and RFK endorsed Donald Trump. Like he was the architect. Yeah, Callie and Casey Means, I think, were part of the conversation as well. But Charlie
Mm.
Kirk was I understand, the architect of bringing RFK in, getting him to endorse Trump, and getting him in the administration.
Mm.
I think that's a piece, and I think that's why he started talking about that. So I get why RFK was there. Obviously, I get why Don Jr., who he was close was, and Tucker Carlson, who he was also close was, and and a lot of the other people that spoke early on that actually knew him more personally.
Mm.
But either way, I think he had a significant amount of input over the cabinet, and so probably that's part of the reason that Tulsi was there, and part of the reason that Marco Rubio was there. But yeah,
Mm.
it is this piece where, like, I think one of the things that needs to be made clear is that the Republican Party is not the Christian party, right? I would say that if you're a Bible believing Christian and you believe in historic traditional Christian values that are drawn out from the Scripture, I don't know how you don't at this point side with the Republican Party. Me as a Christian, this
Mm.
is where I am, and this is where Charlie was. I'm not saying the Republican Party is perfect. I'm not saying that this is a permanent marriage between the Republican Party and the Christians. I think Christians should always support whatever is most closely aligning with Christian values. I'm more focused on policy than behavior of the person who's in charge. I mean, there are some Christians that basically on policy would agree with me on a lot of things, but they don't like Trump's behaviors. And so he's like, well, anyway, I think we should be more focused on policy than whether or not Trump offends our sensibilities. I'm very frustrated about that. But anyway, as a Christian, I don't, again, this is not a Christian party. It's the Republican Party, and it's a big tent party, right? Like
Right.
that's what we did with Trump, and that's what we need to do in order to be able to defeat the radical left, right? We need to understand who's our enemy and who are our allies. And so the Republican Party is not the Christian party, but it is the party, again, that most closely aligns with Christian values. And Christians, I would recommend, get on board, get involved, help out, because we need all the help that we can get in order to be able to defeat the radical left. And I think you should just let go of the fact that if not everything that's on the Republican platform is perfectly in line with Christian values, because the other side is almost directly against Christian values in just about every way. And
Mm.
so that's kind of an aside, but that was one of the things that kind of came out of, going there and being a part of this meeting, is that, like, okay, this is both highly political and it's also highly Christian. Really excited about the fact that they're singing worship songs, and it's being broadcast on 2 national television stations, because that's
Mm.
pretty significant. America has gone so far, and Hillary Clinton has already come out and said, "Be careful of white Christian men." It's like, you mean, what do you mean? Like, white Christian men? That was the guy that was shot, not the guy that did the shooting. So let's. I'm not sure that's who we need to be the most worried about.
Mhm.
But like, the fact that for a period of time Jesus was mentioned so much on public television, I think is very significant, because our culture, especially media and all this stuff, has really gone very anti-Christian, and it's been this slow
Right.
drip of anti-Christian. Again, I'm not saying everybody out there needs to adopt Christianity. I believe it. I think it's true. I'd encourage you to seriously consider it.
Mm.
But like, the fact that the world was so anti-Christian, I think it's actually a good thing that some Christian stuff, some talking about somebody whose life was built on Jesus, being publicly broadcast again in America, is a positive step away from the unnecessarily, like, again, anti-Christian. If you want to critique real issues that have happened within Christianity, by the way, I have a problem with them probably too, right? Like, most of the things that people would critique about, like, issues that happen related to the church, I would say, number one, Christians, just because they believe in Jesus and they believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, doesn't mean that they're perfect. And there are also bad actors within the Christian church who manipulate and take advantage. And so there are bad things that happen. And those are valid, and I don't think I'm not opposed to people bringing them out. But like, the fact that we could have this event that was broadcast nationally, I think is a really good step. But there is that danger that people
Mm.
are seeing the merger of Christianity and politics.
Mm.
And I don't think it's bad. It would be bad for America to be a quote unquote Christian nation. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think Christianity was the foundation, the bedrock of where a lot of the ideas that that the founding fathers brought. They were all built on that. And I think it's the reason that America and the West historically, although much of the rest of the West has fallen away on this, it's the reason that we have a society that everybody else wants to come and live in, right? And so I think it's actually a good thing. We can still allow, anybody from any religion and whatever, but I think having a Christian nation probably is not a bad thing, since
Right.
it's why, again, it's it's the bedrock of our constitutions, of state constitutions and our national constitution, and why we have such an incredible country, I believe. But I think, like, there is a lot of tension and uncomfortableness by people who are not Christians with the Republican Party seeming to too closely align with Christianity. And then there's also discomfort on the other side by Christians who are like, I don't know about, like, a Christianity fully aligning with a political party. And I don't think that's what's happening, but I think that could be something that people take away from. So I feel like it's worth talking about the fact that, like, Christianity, there's an overlap right now. It's like the Venn diagram, right? There's a significant overlap between Christian values and republicanism at the moment. Not a perfect overlap, but there's a significant overlap, and I think that that's okay. But we just need to, in the church, make sure that we continue to preach Jesus, not republicanism.
Right.
Although, as we go into specific issues that are presented in the scriptures, we need to preach those as a church. And then in politics, we focus on, what are the conservative values? They're the things that that we need to win on. Essentially, like we have to focus on the 80-20 issues, in order to be able to win in 2026, so that we can, stop the advance of the radical left. So,
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
that's a big diatribe. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And one thing that you had said, this concern that you have of bad actors in the church, um, I feel like as it concerns this event, there's a lot of bad actors within the GOP as well that are trying to cynically weaponize people's emotions, which are running very high right now, um, to basically further their political agenda. And I feel like, a lot of what this memoriam had to do with was because, though many of these politicians that spoke may have good intentions and they're probably very passionate about these causes, like, Stephen Miller, for example, he was like fire and brimstone in his speech. It sounded a little bit like Joseph Goebbels, but um, like very revenge oriented. Um, but yeah, I feel like there's a lot of bad actors in the GOP that, I heard that they had a lot of voter registration tables set up at the event, which is great. I think there should be more TPUSA chapters. It's just more so the timing of it, I feel like is in bad taste. Like not even 3 days after Charlie Kirk had died, like, they were already at the ready, we need more Republicans and whatnot. And I
That part, it's interesting. That part I don't really have a huge problem with. And I'll tell you why.
yeah.
Charlie would have wanted it, right? And this is where, when we talk about when we're remembering somebody, like I think in line with what people had some similar critique. Like, did Donald Trump again drone on and say some things and be like, "Oh my gosh"? I think a lot of people were like, "Come on, Trump, rein it in." Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. However, Charlie Kirk would have loved it because he loved Trump. You know how many rallies he tried to get Trump to come and speak at, and Erica Kirk absolutely loved it. Did you see her after he went and is like she came out and just immediately went right into his arms and hugged him tight, right?
Great
Which is
moment.
that was to me that might have been even. I mean, the forgiveness piece was huge, but I almost feel like that was maybe more significant. But
Yeah.
a lot of people will disagree with me, but that's fine. But I just thought that like it's very significant in terms of understanding like how beloved Donald Trump is to the people who are close to him, which is very different than what we see out of the other side. Right.
Right.
There's turmoil and all this, crap, but the people who are close to him just have a huge affection and love for him, and he for them. So
Yeah.
anyway.
One thing to kind of piggyback on what you just said, Charlie Kirk probably would have loved it, but I'm not Charlie Kirk and I can't put words in his mouth. The Charlie Kirk, that was no longer is, and he's with God now. And I feel like, it's wrong of us to say that like on the other side when he experienced that beatific vision of God, which I think he did experience because of how he led his life. Who knows what perspective he acquired? I mean, it's incomprehensible. You know what I mean? So I think it's a little bit. I don't know. I mean,
The best we can do is understand him based on how he lived and how I think we have no idea what I mean, we, even as a Christian, very studied in the scripture, we still have very little understanding of what it's like where he is, except that he's
right.
not in pain. He is, I'm assuming he's in heaven, and I am. He's with Jesus. He's, yeah. I don't think he's but maybe he sees some things more clearly and he's like, I wish I had done this. And maybe in that sense, but like all we can know is based on how he lived and how he did. And I think Erica has got probably the best pulse of that. And given the fact that she was behind all this, I would say this is in line with how Charlie would have, the best we
Yeah.
can understand how Charlie would have wanted it to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. So to kind of circle back to, what we had talked about, which is kind of the fulcrum of, our disagreement is Erica Kirk forgiving Tyler Robinson for murdering uh, her husband and her two, children's father. Um, yeah, when I saw that she had said that, I was a little bit surprised, but at the same time, I kind of wasn't. And I don't want to pass judgment on this because everybody grieves differently. Everybody goes through a different process. Some people have a much stronger faith than I do. So there's certain things about this that I can't comprehend that only she knows and that she will only ever know. I'm just going off of what I know, what my faith is and whatnot. But I see in a lot of these high profile cases, where murder is involved, where a family member's lost, um, there's just this pressure because you're in the public eye. And I don't want to sound cynical again. But I think about, what happened to Austin Metcalf's father. He's a Christian. And, after his son was murdered by Carmelo Anthony, in cold blood. He was murdered. A lot of people say that Carmelo Anthony is innocent and he's a victim of injustice and whatnot. But
I,
he's
I
a
have to say, this is not the athlete Carmelo Anthony. I know that, but just in case people are watching, this is not the athlete, but another person with the same name, Carmelo Anthony. I think his name is the Carmelo starts with a K, right?
right.
In this
Yep.
case. All right, go ahead, continue. Yep. After.
Yeah. And I remember hearing that Austin Metcalf's father, he had actually gone to a press conference where Carmelo Anthony's family was present, with the press and whatnot. And the reason why he went there was because he wanted to pray with Carmelo Anthony's family, for, you know, not only Austin Metcalf, but Carmelo Anthony as well. And, instead of the press and whatnot welcoming him in and Carmelo Anthony's family, he was taken out by the police. And he wasn't in violation of any court order for being there, for being present there, but the police escorted him out. And there were spokesmen there for Carmelo Anthony saying him showing up there is like an insult to the dignity of his son. And I hear that and I think to myself, I'm like, that's horrific. You know what I mean? Why should we be, and I don't say this lightly, why should we be forgiving toward these people if they don't even accept and a lot of people say, well, the reason why we should be forgiving is because they don't accept our acts of kindness, our prayers. But I think about the gravity of the situation here. Like 11 days before Erica Kirk had spoke at that memoriam, her husband was killed. I mean, we've seen the video. His blood was gushing out. And,
Wish I hadn't
Michael,
seen it, but
yeah. And just the magnitude of the situation, the amount that was stolen from Erica, from, you know, Charlie's two children, this man could have probably been president. I mean, Michael Knowles said the same thing. Like he had all the traits of a president. Um, he,
yeah,
not
everybody who was paying attention thought this guy could eventually, if he wants to, be president. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
But more importantly, what he's missing out on is just incomprehensible. Like he's never gonna, see his daughter on her first day of school when she gets married. He's never gonna see his grandchildren, his grandchildren, children. I mean, the amount he probably would have had more kids with Erica, but that will never be. So when I think about all that, I really, really think about it. And then I hear Erica's words, I forgive Tyler. I think to myself, okay, number one, she hasn't met Tyler, just like us. I mean, she knows that Tyler killed Charlie, but she's never seen him face to face. And there's a difference between forgiving someone that you've never seen and forgiving someone who you are actually present in front of and you can feel their presence and see them and talk to them and and understand their motivations and where they came up or where they grew up from. Because I feel like you're not seeing or forgiving the entirety of someone unless you know who they are. Um, and yeah, and I don't know what Erica is going through. I don't want to pass judgment on her, say that she did the wrong thing, because again, I'm not her. All I'm saying is this is how how I feel if I were in a situation like that. You know what I mean? And I don't think I would have the power to forgive someone that murdered, somebody I loved. I just don't think I do. Um, so she's probably stronger than me, and I don't doubt her intentions and whatnot. I just
I mean, I think it's worth questioning though. Like, so I think it's worth asking questions. Like we don't want to be judgmental. We don't know what's going on in anybody's mind, but I think it is like, okay to say, like, okay, like, how does somebody come to a place where they can forgive something so big and so heinous so quickly? Like, these are questions. And so I think it's important. Like, one of the things that they taught me when I was in this like rape crisis counseling thing is like, you never take anything off the table, right? So if somebody says I want to kill myself, you don't say no, 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 you can't do that, because part of the reason they're in that position is because they feel like that nothing is in their control and this is something that they can control. So if you take it off the table, that
mm,
actually might make them more likely to do it, right?
right,
And so anyway, but I think in order to find truth, we have to be willing to ask difficult questions, and I think it's worth doing, because if we don't, I think there's a this relates to faith, but I think you could relate it to like seeking truth. And there's a professor, old professor, who used to, I don't know if he still teaches, but he was at BC for a long period of time, named Peter Kreeft. I looks like it should be Kreeft, Kreeft. But I listened to him. He did a talk that was on. He was up in, I think it was Bowdoin, but he was talking about like the problem of pain, suffering, and evil in terms of like how could God exist if he's and anyway. So as he's having this conversation, one of the things that he said was that doubts, or questions, right, are the ants in our pants that keep faith alive. So I would say that doubts and questions are things that we need to pursue in order to find truth. And so we can't be afraid to ask difficult questions, including, okay, so like part of me looks at this, right, and says that was a really good tactical move for the Republican Party to do that as like like kind of like a cherry on the top. Not only did we not burn down cities, but the
mm,
person who is primarily most significantly impacted by this heinous act forgave the person who did it. Right. And so part of me, I mean, I was there, I was shocked initially, and I was like, she did what? Right. Like, there were people there that were immediately they were clapping and they were like, what? And I was just like, huh? Because like I tend to start from a place of skepticism.
mm,
And so part of me is going to ask that question, no matter what, right? And so like I think it's worth asking that question. But um, from where I sit and from how I've kind of analyzed this and looked at this, there's other elements to the conversation that I think help kind of give a little bit more clarity. Right. So she specifically quoted Jesus before doing it, which is where she actually misquoted it. I felt bad. She
mhm,
transposed two of the words, but
mm,
but she said, "Forgive them, Father, for," I think she said, "No, not what they do." But anyway, they know not what they do. They
right,
not know. Anyway, but anyway, but the point which she was trying to quote is, "They know not what they do." And this is Jesus dying on the cross when he's saying this, and the people that are the reason that he's on the cross are the people that he's talking about, right?
right,
So if you're in tune with the core depth of Jesus, that's his level of forgiveness, and that's what he calls all of us to, which is incredibly challenging, incredibly difficult. It's so easy when something like this happens to be angry. But another thing that kind of really connects this to Charlie is, not only did he believe this, not only was he on the same page with her with this, but also, like, Jesus came to save initially, like, yes, the church birthed from him, but he primarily came to save the Jews. right? There's actually a place where somebody comes to him and he's making a point, so it's more complicated than this, but he basically says that I've come to save the Jews and you're a Gentile. Should I give you the scraps off the children's tables? And then she responds, and he heals her or her child or whatever. But the point is, like, yes, eventually the church expanded to everyone, and that was the intent. But Jesus was primarily trying to reach, like, in his ministry while he was here on earth. The Holy Spirit is what spread it out to all nations, but Jesus himself was focused on the people of Israel, the Jews, and they're the very people who killed him.
Right.
Right. So Charlie Kirk, who was he trying to reach? Primarily young men. Right? Young men who are confused and twisted and manipulated by the powers that be that are trying to destroy them and cause them to do harmful things to themselves and to others. So so the killer, I mean, if all the information from the FBI is accurate and this is the right guy or whatever, but the killer is exactly the type of person that Charlie was living his life to reach. So it's, by the way, I'm not saying Charlie Kirk is Jesus. That's not the point, but this is a very close parallel.
Tyler's not right wing. Like he was dating his roommate was trans. That's just like something that's been making the round.
Tyler was on the left. Yes, his family was on the right, but he had been radicalized over the course of the last couple of years and was dating a man who thinks he's a woman. And yes, on the left. And the stuff all around it says he was killing him because of, like, his hate speech and stuff like that. But again, this is the type of person that this is why Charlie Kirk was going to college campuses. And so this is, like, in the same vein, like, this is exactly, I think, in his, from what I understand about Charlie Kirk, exactly what he would have wanted. And so, like, I think when you kind of look at it through that lens, it's a lot easier to understand how she could come to this place, recognizing that he's not the primary problem. He's not the reason. He's a tool that's been used and twisted by evil people and evil spirits. I think from a Christian perspective, we believe that there are demonic forces that are impacting and kind of leading and pushing. But, like, ultimately, that's what happened here. So, like, it's and again, forgiving is not saying that here in I think Michael Knowles put something out about this afterwards, which was basically saying, hey, we're like, Christian forgiveness does not say that there are not consequences. It's not saying that we're going to let this guy free. We're not going to hold him to the full extent of the law. We absolutely are, and we absolutely should. But ultimately, that like, recognizing that the core problem is actually not this individual who committed this act, and I think that makes it a lot easier to come to a place of forgiveness. I don't know how, like, if it was like if there's some of these dark people up behind closed doors or whatever. I think there was a conversation on Mark Halpern. I think he has a podcast, and I was watching it. Ryan had shared it with me, and he asked one of the other people on there, is like, well, why don't you forgive Keith Olbermann because of what he said? Because he said some pretty horrible things about Charlie after he died, and also a bunch of supporters and this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, well, this is a little bit different, because, like, we're dealing with like somebody who's pushing the types of things. Before I would consider forgiveness, I want to see some repentance. I want to see somebody saying, oh, shoot, I'm part of the problem. I'm creating an environment where people are radicalized. I'm not going to forgive them if they're not repentant, right? But recognizing the nature of, like, this is a kid who is twisted and manipulated by people. I think it changes it makes it a lot easier, I think, is what I would say. Again, I'm not inside the mind of Erica Kirk, but that's, like, my understanding of Christianity. I think that's where it's at.
Yeah. I like what you said about repentance, because I feel like Tyler has showed none of that. And with a lot of these people, like Carmelo Anthony, who, he was getting hundreds of thousands of dollars from Black people donating to him, even though he had killed an innocent guy. I feel like these murderers, these killers, they should show some repentance before we forgive them, because, like anything else, forgiveness is earned, and he hasn't earned it. And
Well,
another thing too that I also, sorry,
oh, go
another
for
thing
it.
I also wanted to mention is, I feel like we are, and I know this sounds like kind of barbaric, but we are soft on these people as a society. And I think, though it is important that, as Christians, we recognize the root of evil, which is in sin and demonic influence, we can't forget that people also possess agency and they make a choice. That Tyler, he made a choice to go out and kill Charlie Kirk.
Sure.
And my opinion is, I mean, of course, I think we're all in agreement that he should receive the death penalty. But, some things I've been thinking about over the past couple days, and you may disagree with this, but I don't feel like it's up to the state to kill a person when the state wasn't impacted by that person's act of violence. And though you may think this is just another instance of reciprocal violence, I think the family, the people who have experienced the loss from this murderer, they should be able to kill.
Have you been reading the Old Testament?
I know, yeah. Believe me, I know this is it kind of sounds barbaric and
Well,
whatnot.
I'm actually not saying it's barbaric. Like so, it's interesting. There was a conversation that Charlie Kirk, one of the videos I've seen since his passing. I think I'd seen it before, but
Mm,
was there's this guy who has some knowledge of Scripture, specifically the New Testament,
mhm,
and is having a conversation with Charlie about like why. I think he's asking Charlie if he's a Christian nationalist, and Charlie's like, "Well, I've never described myself that way. I am a
yeah.
Christian, and I'm here in America, and I love my nation." And this guy was essentially trying to argue that that's not Christian. I don't know. It was a weird like. His argument didn't make a lot of sense to me, but anyway, Charlie kind of went on and used a bunch of like Old Testament references talking about governments because like
Mm,
Christians engaging in government and trying to make government in line with biblical truth, I think, is something that God wants. Is the short version. I could go into like the detail, but like much of the Old Testament, like especially when you look at the Old Testament laws for the nation of Israel, were ones that were instituted by God, right?
mm,
And so in the Old Testament, in the nation of Israel, they actually had these rules that like if somebody killed somebody, right, that there was what's called the avenger of blood, and this person was a family member who would pursue and if if you in this situation somebody from the Kirk family could go and pursue and kill the individual who did this. That was actually part of the law that was allowed essentially. And now those people who had committed crimes theoretically could go to cities of refuge. I don't remember the exact details, but I think if it could be proven that they actually committed the crime, that they wouldn't even be safe in the city of refuge, but
mm,
only if it couldn't be proven, I think. But this is like, don't quote me on that bit. But the other pieces I'm very confident of. And so it's interesting. So what you're describing is actually essentially how the Old Testament, like the nation of Israel that God set up, was orchestrated. That it would actually be the family who were the ones that could pursue and bring about justice. Now, I think we think we're evolved and our system works better, and whether or not that's the case is a whole other story. But here in the
mm,
United States, that is not how it works. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's archaic. I mean, it is old, but the Old Testament, and the reason I want to say this is like part of the conversation that Charlie was having with this guy is like, oh, do you think the New Testament is more valuable than the Old Testament, and we just ignore the Old
Oh,
Testament? It's like the answer is no. Now there are some things that are described in the Old Testament that are not rules and laws for living for today. However, the Old Testament was, from a Christian perspective, that is the Word of God. It
right.
is, and so there's this myth, for instance, that there's an Old Testament God and a New Testament God, and it's like if you think that, then you're not reading it right, or you're
Mm,
listening to the wrong people, because that's actually not the narrative. If you're actually reading and studying the Scriptures, and I've read the Bible many times at this point,
mm,
and that's not what's being presented there. Now there are different customs at different times, but ultimately, like It's not that just because it's old doesn't mean it's bad, essentially. And so, anyway, what you're arguing for is what was instituted in the nation of Israel, essentially.
Right. Um, so I mean, I've talked to some friends of mine who are Christian about this because, something that has always affected my ability to be faithful, like to be a Christian is, and I know it's a hypothetical, it will never happen to me, you know, God, knock on wood. But if somebody I loved was murdered, um, I just I would want to kill them. Like, I mean, obviously, we're all human beings. We all want justice and whatnot. But like, I just, and I don't want to say that's the moral thing to do. I, there's something about that specifically which makes me struggle with faith. And we're kind of, I don't want to change the topic too much because this is, about Charlie and
Hmm.
everything. Um, but I just, I think a lot of people would see that form of retributive justice as a form of revenge. Um, and maybe it is, but I feel like, in this society that we live in now, the state calls its violence law and our violence crime. Like, even in situations like, I mean, look what happened with Daniel Penny when he was on the subway and he was defending all those people from that mentally ill whack job, that was causing problems and whatnot. He was seen as a criminal. Or Kyle Rittenhouse, who shot those pedophiles during the BLM rally that were trying to attack him. Everybody came out and said Kyle Rittenhouse is a murderer. He committed a crime. And I think, you know, people like Austin Metcalf's father, you know, what law-abiding citizens, Christians, are being treated as second-class citizens. And I'm not making an argument for vigilantism, but I feel like in our society, with catch and release and, all these corrupt DAs and whatnot, letting criminals out on the streets, like that guy that killed, the Ukrainian girl on the subway in cold blood. He had been arrested 14 times prior. I just, I think, as Christians, as Republicans, instead of talking, well, I don't want to say that, but instead of focusing so much on loving our enemies, we really need to rain down hard on these people. Not like in a tyrannical, barbaric way, but I mean, this has gone on too long. And it's getting to the point now where, yeah, like I do, and I know this sounds horrific, but I think we should bring back public hangings, like public executions, where people can come and see because, you know, look at what Bukele's doing in El Salvador. He turned a country which was one of the most violent in the world, had some of the most murders per capita of any country in the world. And he got in there and he created this prison where, all these drug cartel members, once they go in there, they never see the light of day. Never see the light of day. And a lot of people, human rights organizations, were critiquing him because, a lot of these criminals, they were arrested because of tattoos and whatnot, and they weren't given due process. But look at El Salvador now, it's safer than the south side of Chicago. So, and I've had debates with people about this. I
Wait,
feel like,
you mentioned Chicago. Chicago's not safe. Is the South Side safe?
no, I said the south side of Chicago, which is not safe. It is not safe. But El
So
Salvador is now safer than many
I
parts
see
of the
what
world.
I see what you're saying. Is it okay? It's increased safety. Oh, you're just picking a place that's very unsafe in America, but it's in America, so it's safer than it used to be in El Salvador. But anyway, the point is, things are much safer as a
Right.
result of these policies.
Exactly. And I feel like, what Trump is doing with federalizing the National Guard in Washington, D.C., which is a hotbed for crime. Like, I mean, I've talked to people that have, either lived or
Oh
visited
yeah,
Washington. It's
well
horrific.
known.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, whenever we do this stuff, whenever we, you know, really rain down on crime and enforce law and order, there's all these people that come in, and even people from outside. And I'm like, I, okay, I care about human rights. I care about the Constitution. I feel like the document is kind of dead as a doornail now, to be honest. Well,
Let's hope we can revive it. But
yeah,
there's some concerns with people in our society. I would say on both sides of the aisle that
yeah,
really kind of use the Constitution as a tool to make an argument, but are less concerned with it than they are with trying to get what they want. And I think
right,
there is a problem there. I think the Constitution is one of the greatest gifts we have as a country, and we need to do what we can to like try to get ourselves in line as a society with it.
mm,
But you know, like there's a lot of you made a lot of really interesting and I think good points here, and
mm,
I think desiring vengeance or revenge, however you want to put it, makes sense. That's a natural human thing. But the question becomes, part of the question becomes, like, where will it end, right? Whether it's legal or illegal. I remember there's a great line if you haven't seen the movie Troy. I think Troy is there's this place where obviously Achilles. I'm sorry, spoiler if you don't know history, or if you haven't seen this incredible movie, then will you ever, right? So Achilles has just actually it's Hector, thinking he's fighting against Achilles, kills Achilles' nephew, and then as a result Achilles goes and challenges Hector and kills Hector, and he's having a conversation with his like kind of girlfriend, we'll call it, who was related to Hector, and Hector killed your cousin, now you've killed mine, where does it end? And
mm,
Achilles says it never ends, right? And I think this is part of the reason that forgiveness is so important and so powerful, is that like it's the like how do we move forward appropriately? How do we move forward as best as we possibly can for our society? If we constantly are living in needing to get revenge, then there's going to be constant violence. How do we end the violence? The way to end the violence is, I think forgiveness is a huge part of it. I think it's also, it sets us free. The whole idea of forgiveness, it's not about the other person, it's more about us, right? It sets us free. They're not holding us over and continuing to have an impact on our life. We have to let them go, essentially, as a piece of it. Um, but there's also that idea of like, how do we have the best society we possibly can? Well, the other aspect is what you've kind of got at here, which is, well, we need to clamp down. I mean, we need to stop this insanity as a society where we're feeling bad for criminals and be like, okay, yeah, jail should suck, right? Like I say, we don't need cable in jail. I don't think they need to have like all these things that they've like turned jail into like a hotel,
yeah,
where they have better food than some of the people that are on the outside and they have everything taken care of. It's still not a great place to be. I get it, but like, I don't like all these reforms in jail. Like, I think are like jail it should be bad. Like
mm,
we're putting them there because they've done something that's bad in our society. We need to discourage that by not making jail better. I honestly think we should make jail worse. I don't think we should make it to the point where people are going to die of disease in there. But I
mm,
do think that, like, for people who actually go there, who have done, especially those who have done violent crime, like, it should not be a good place. It should be a place that they really want to be afraid of going to. And in general, if we want to have a safe society, we need to prioritize innocent people, not criminals, and not keep letting them out like they did with the guy that stabbed that girl, the Ukrainian girl. Like, what the? Like, we
yeah,
need to be tough on crime. So that's the answer. That's better than vengeance because it's fixing the problem that created this. So we need to go, I do think we need to go hard at without doing it in a way that's illegal, but we do need to change and fix the laws. We need to get rid of these corrupt DAs like we have here in Cumberland County, who tried to claim that the person who killed Charlie was right wing. As you kind of said, he wasn't, right. But this is what she was trying to argue. Jackie Sartoris, who's full of it, needs to go. She's a Soros implant, and we need to get rid of these DAs that are not willing to prosecute. And we need to be aggressive against criminals. And I do think we need to bring, I am in favor of capital punishment. I don't know. People seem to think it's archaic and evil. It's like, well, I think murdering and raping children I think is evil. And I think those people have given up their right to live. I'm willing to go and preach the gospel to them before they die. If they need somebody to do that, I'm happy to do that and give them an opportunity to repent and accept their Savior before they go to meet him in judgment. Right. I think that, but that's the other piece, is like part of the reason that what I don't pursue vengeance is because the Bible says, vengeance is mine, declares the Lord. So we address it through fixing the public safety, both through the courts and through like the police, um, and by forgiving and moving on with our own lives, so that this doesn't dominate us and we aren't hindered by it. That's kind of the philosophy that I think makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Well, this has been a fun discussion. I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to cover, but this has been good.
Yeah, I really think we didn't really leave any stones unturned. We got to it all. Dude, this has been a fantastic conversation. I mean, I learn a lot from you. Like, I haven't read the Bible from cover to cover. I should, but I actually didn't know about what you said earlier in the Old Testament. I mean, I've heard the line, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but I didn't know that that form of retributive justice was common in that society. So yeah, I find that really interesting. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that the further we get away from capital punishment, that was their form, but the further we get away from capital punishment, the more innocent people have to be in fear of criminals. And that's why then
Right.
I mean, this is what you see in all these like these movies and like Batman. Why does Batman need to get involved? It's because the police aren't doing their job, right?
Right.
Vigilante. This is what causes people to want to be a vigilante.
I think that's
Is
happening right now.
Yeah, is
Or
right. I mean, that's what's happening in our society. We're not prosecuting it. So innocent people. I kind of like. I remember, if you haven't seen this, this is also a great movie. I don't advocate for doing this, but it is in this desire for retributive justice that I think we have because of the fact that criminals are getting ahead. Is Boondock Saints. It's great. I mean, it's a couple of Irish people who just start killing bad people. It's just
yeah,
like, again, I'm not advocating for that, but if you feel the need and you're feeling like I want to see some retributive justice, it's a good movie to watch.
right.
But do not emulate. But yeah, so yeah, we live in challenging times for sure, and I think there are clear solutions, and unfortunately, for Democrats, if you none of the solutions are on their side, so that's why we
Yeah.
got to get Republicans elected in order to force the Democrat Party to dissolve and be replaced by something else that makes sense, or reform itself. I think one of the things I posted after Charlie Kirk died, I was talking to a friend, was he's like, you should post that, but it was like, here's my message to Democrats: fix your shit or abandon ship.
Yeah.
Like,
There you go.
yeah. So that's it. But anyway, so thanks for being here again, Forrest. Hopefully we'll get one of these on the books in the near future, as well. And we'll see everybody else back here. I think if I'm understanding things correctly, I believe we're going to have gubernatorial candidate Ben Midgley on Monday. So around, like, I think 1 or something like that. I guess I could check my calendar to confirm, so I give out correct information. Yeah, that's what it looks like on my calendar. So we'll see you all back here on